Welcome to 52 Living Ideas. Today's Saturday. We are focusing on Bucky's ideas, Buckminster Fuller's ideas. We're going through the operating manual for Spaceship Earth. And today I'm going to be talking about the concepts of synergy and wealth. Now, I have to say that this is very complicated. Synergy, as best as I understand it, is the core concept of Buckminster Fuller. I always look for, I've studied many great thinkers, and I always look for the structure of their thought and say, and typically there is a core concept each of them have. For example, for folks, if you could mute yourself, the sound quality is better. For Louis Sullivan, it is form follows function. And all of his thought kind of comes from there. For Buckminster Fuller, I think his core concept is synergy. And I've been studying Buckminster Fuller only for about 3 weeks. Okay, so I don't think, and he has written a whole 2-volume book on synergetics. So my ability of dealing with this concept is very poor. And I'm at the same time, it's my principle to try my best to try to put as many things together as possible and then be kind of explicate it to myself and to others and get feedback. There are many people on this Zoom meeting who know a lot more about Buckminster Fuller. And my friend CJ knows I've been studying this for 2 to 3 weeks. He's been studying it for 2 to 3 decades. So that's like 52 weeks of a year, 10 years in a decade. So that's 500 times more, okay? And so firstly, I'm glad to announce that he's going to be back talking about Buckminster Fuller's concept of comprehensively commanded automation. That is, I think, chapter 3 or chapter 4. I think it is chapter 3 in this. That's going to be next week on Sunday. We're going to be announcing that event late today, hopefully. So that's, but that's fixed. He's very systematic. So he's writing it up, writing what he wants to say. And he will also be dealing with all questions about Buckminster Fuller, as well as this book. Okay, these are the questions that I'm unable to answer because I don't have the full context of Bucky's thought. So he's going to be doing that. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to be talking about the concept, Bucky's concept of synergy as best as I understand it, and his concept of wealth, which is, I think, tied to that, also as best as I understand it. And then I'm going to open it up for questions and comments from people. If you are familiar with this book, if you're familiar with Bucky's ideas, I invite you to speak up, to go ahead and talk about, the ideas. Joe, I don't know who else is on the call, but I'm going to look through people who are familiar with Bucky's or who have read this, and I invite you to give your own take. So after that section, and then the Q&As, we'll do Q&As. After that, I'm going to talk about what I have gotten from Bucky so far. Okay, again, this is, my, not even my, this is not my take on Bucky. This is what I've learned from Bucky and how I've integrated it into my thinking so far. So that's the plan. All right, so so I'm going to start by just using most of the text of Bucky. This is chapter 6. So I'm going to be reading selective parts, and I'm going to tell you what I think they mean and how I see the issues. And then I'm going to open it up for Joe and other people who are familiar with Bucky and this particular concept of synergy to talk more about it. And then we will do Q&A. Okay. So let's start by, in the beginning, he says, firstly, what is synergy? Okay, what is synergy? So point is that synergy is the only word in our language which means behavior of the whole system unpredictable by the separately observed behaviors of any of the system's separate parts or subassemblies of the system parts. Okay. Since in synergy is the only word in our language meaning behavior of the wholes, unpredictable behavior of the parts, it is clear that our society does not think that the behaviors of the whole system unpredictable. It doesn't think much about that. If they thought a lot more about it, there would be like a whole panoply of words to deal with this concept. So that is very, very interesting. That is a not a very well understood concept. It is not very well focused on concept. He talks about him interviewing, asking people again and again in all the gatherings, do you know what synergy means and what it is? And only 1 in 300 people could say something about synergy. And that itself is a very good, very important piece of information, that this is a very unusual thing. All right, now I'm going to jump into the chapter. So first thing is that how do you think synergetically? Okay, to ensure our inclusion of all variables with which we must eventually deal, we will always start synergetically with the universe. Now that the universe has been defined and provided to us with master containment. So this is one of the principles. In order to think synergetically, you have to start with the whole. That's the only place you can start. And the next one, we may thus discover not only what needs to be done in a fundamental way, but we may also discover how it may be accomplished by our own directly sized initiative, undertaken and sustained without any further authority than our function in the universe. Now, this is a very interesting point. It's a very deep point. I'll step back and connect it to the other things that we've been talking about. His whole approach of dealing with systems is to abstract and understand general principles. And these are the general principles operative throughout the universe. I want to remind you that his concept of universe is unusual. It is not the scientific concept of universe. The science concept of universe is essentially about what he would call the physical universe. He includes the mental, the intellectual, or what he calls the metaphysical part. So he's talking about universes comprised of metaphysical and physical. So ideas and actions, principles and actions, intellect and the body, physical energy, and the conceptual principles that capture the understanding of those energies. So those two things together is what he's talking about. And what he's saying is that if you do things right, if you're actually thinking synergetically, you have access to those general principles. So even if as a single human being you're now acting in alignment with all the principles operative in how the physical energy and what he calls the intellectual energy or intellectual flow is happening. So you have tremendous leverage if you actually get those principles right. So that's what he's meaning. That's what he means by this here. Again, I want to make one point here of my particular approach to Bucky, is that I'm relentlessly focused on the epistemological approach, his methodological approach, not so much on his kind of the physical energy approach, partly because of my interest, partly because of my knowledge. So I'm mostly focused here in the synergy concept of the kind of the metaphysical part and how it relates to the physical part. So that is the angle from which I'm coming. I just wanted to make it clear. There are ways in which you can go from the physical side and then come to the metaphysical side. Okay, next one. Next point I want to focus on now, get to the concept of wealth. Okay, now this was a very surprising concept, okay? Primarily because just like scientists, he talks about systems before, and he says scientists think of systems as physical systems, and all the terms and all the thoughts that they have are connected to physical systems. Similarly, wealth, most people, when they think of wealth, they are focused on the physical systems. And he's pointing out that that's actually not true. There is wealth is not just physical. Okay, that's a huge point, and I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to focus just, that is the core that I want to talk about. What is quote unquote intellectual wealth or metaphysical wealth, the wealth of general principles, if you will. Okay, this is kind of my way of understanding his, the point he's making, but I think this is his point. Okay, let me go ahead. Okay, so firstly, what is wealth? Wealth is our organized capacity to cope effectively with the environment in sustaining our healthy regeneration and decreasing both physical and metaphysical restrictions on the forward days of our life. Okay, now this is very interesting. So there are a few points I want to make here, few things I want to bring to your attention. So firstly, wealth is about what you can do in the future, because no matter what, one point, beautiful point he makes, regardless of how much wealth you have, can you change anything in the past? No, you can't change anything in the past. That's just given. Okay. So what is the value of wealth? Wealth is for the, what you can do in the future. That's what it is. So it is future oriented. So that's one fundamental point. Okay, there's lots of fundamental points here. It's your capacity, it's your capability. Okay, that's the genus, it's the capability. What is it the capability for? It is for sustaining and allowing for regeneration. So it's, we are living beings. We have to continuously regenerate ourselves physically. All living organisms have to do that. So it is regarding our capacity to regenerate. And it is our capacity to regenerate at two levels. One at the physical level, and second, what he calls the metaphysical level or the intellectual level. Okay. So those are the elements. So you can see it as a system that it requires regeneration. You can also see that there is a physical component of it and there is an intellectual component of it. I'm going to use the term intellectual, conceptual, and metaphysical interchangeably in this. Okay, I'm going to continue his words here. Now, we can account for wealth more precisely as the number of forward days for a specific number of people we are physically prepared to sustain at a physically stated time and space, liberating levels of metabolic and metaphysical regeneration. Note that he keeps on bringing in not just metabolic, not just your body, but your mind. What do you need for the regeneration of your mind? Okay. It is obvious that the real wealth of life aboard our planet is forwardly operative, metabolic, forwardly operative, metabolic, and intellectual regenerating system. Okay, so he's talking about it as being forwardly operative. That's one part. Second is that it's a regenerating system. Okay, and it has two aspects of it. There is metabolic or physical energy aspects, and there is intellectual aspects. Okay, synergetics discloses that wealth, which represents our ability to deal successfully with our forward energetic regeneration and provide increased degree of freedom of initiation and no interfering actions, breaks down cybernetically into two main parts: physical energy and metaphysical know-how. Okay, now this is very explicit. He's separating it out. One other point I want to make here, he talks about increased degree of freedom. In earlier sentences, he talks about, you know, removing the restrictions, both physically, on physical and metaphysical regeneration. Okay, so those are key points. Okay, so physical energy and metaphysical know-how. All right, next one. Now he's talking about how we came to this state. I mean, I'm going to jump very quickly, just point out one point about the next chapter, where he talks about the total wealth per capita of the United States when the United States was formed and how much it had become in 1960s. Okay, and it is astonishing. It is like a million times, something like that. It is huge. It's a huge jump. Okay, huge jump, or 1,000 times, whatever. But it is far beyond what a person living at Jefferson's time could comprehend. What kind of life is possible. We live longer. The amount of um, prosperity we have, amount of connectivity we have towards each other, uh, you know, uh, and amount of wealth in the terms that um, Buckminster Fuller defines, that is so much larger than they could, even their most optimistic estimates would have predicted. Okay, this is a huge point. Okay, that when things are going right, when things are working synergetically, the effects of that are way beyond kind of most calculations, which are based mostly on physical energy calculations. Um, so let me, this is a lengthier paragraph that talks about, um, his take on the relationship between the intellectual and physical. From this moment of comprehending energy circuits and thenceforth, man's really important function in universe was his intellection, use of his intellectual capability, which taught him to intercept and redirect local energy patterning in universe, and thus to reorganize and shunt those flow patterns so that they would impinge on livers to increase humanity's capabilities to do the manifold tasks leading directly and indirectly towards humanity's forward metabolic regeneration. Okay, so what he's saying is that the function of the intellect is to understand the patterns of physical energy and redesign those patterns. Design is a very deep word in his vocabulary. If you attended the presentation on Akoff, you can see that too. It's a kind of redesigning the system so that the energy flows are restructured so that they are more synergetic. And you're doing that relentlessly. So that's the function. That's the connection between the intellect and the physical energy. Let's go on. What we now have demonstrated metaphysically is that every time man makes a new experiment, he always learns more. He cannot learn less. He may learn that what he thought was not true. By elimination of a false premise, his basic capital wealth, which in his given lifetime is disembarrassed of further preoccupation with consideration of how to employ a worthless, time-consuming hypothesis, freeing his time for more effective exploratory investments is to give man increased wealth. Okay, so now you can see how he's applying it at the intellectual level. We find experimentally regarding metaphysical phenomena, the intellect, which we call know-how, that every time we employ and test our intellectual know-how by experimental rearrangement of physical energy interactions, either associated with mass or disassociated with energy, we always learn more. So what you're doing is that you are relentlessly, you have these principles of operation, and you are relentlessly using them to restructure energy. And you're always seeing it as an experiment. And you're taking in the results of the experiment to make those principles better. And you're doing that relentlessly. Okay. The interrelated, interaccommodative generalized principles found to be operative in all special case experiences. Irreversible wealth is thus irreversible wealth is the so far attained effective magnitude of our physically organized ordering of the use of those generalized principles. This was not very clearly spoken. So let me go ahead and say what he's saying is that really the thing with which all of this mental work is captured, the ultimate result of it, are these generalized principles that are applicable across the board. So from, once you discover a generalized principle, all your energy, your mental energy flows through that. You're getting your physical energy to flow through that. And also you're talking to other people with these general principles. And if they pick up those principles too, then the cooperation, you can cooperatively think and correct the principles, and you can cooperatively engage in rearrangement of physical energy, which is business, for example. Um, these kind of mental ideas which provide the base for cooperative human action. Okay. Wealth is anti-entropy at a most exquisite degree of concentration. The difference between mind and brain is that brain deals only with memorized, subjective, special case experiences and objective experiments, while mind extracts and employs the general principles and integrates and interrelates their effective employment. Brain deals exclusively with the physical, the mind exclusively with the metaphysical. Wealth is the product of the progressive mastery of the matter by mind. Okay, this is the heart of what he's saying. Okay, so I'm going to read it again because this is, if you get this, you get everything that he's saying. Wealth is the anti-entropy at a most exquisite degree of concentration. The difference between mind and brain is that brain deals only with memorized, subjective, special case experiences and objective experiments, while mind extracts and employs the generalized principles and integrates and interrelates their effective employment. Brain deals exclusively with the physical and mind exclusively with the metaphysical. Wealth is the product of progressive mastery of matter by mind. Okay, this is the heart of what he's saying. This is his conception of wealth. This is what has produced the wealth. Okay, wealth, again, another formulation. Wealth as anti-entropy develops compound interest through synergy, which grows, which growth is as yet entirely unaccounted anywhere around the earth in any of its political economic systems. We give intrinsic value to the material. Okay, so this is his point that the value of intellectual achievements, the generalized principles, both of physical, and this is what I would emphasize, these are not just principles of physical energy, these are also principles of cooperation between human beings. There are general principles of that. So for example, in my book, Jefferson saying all men are created equal, and that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that each human being is endowed by nature or by God with certain rights, and among them are rights to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And governments are instituted to protect these rights. Okay, this is a principle. This is a principle. It's a very deep principle about human beings, which makes possible interaction between human beings. Okay, this was completely new. This is one of the reasons why I regard this to be one of the cores. There are many, many countries who adopted different versions of it. This is an example of a principle, a human principle that makes possible human action. Um, let me see. Um, so I will end with just one quote. Here we witness mind over matter, humanity's escape from limitations of his exclusive identity only with some sovereignly circumscribed geographical locality. Um, Again, let me bring to the theme that we did in the first thing, that is the first meetup, and that was about the pirates, the great pirates. A local civilization, let's take the extreme situation of a tribe in the evolutionary context. It is purely physical. It's purely physical. There isn't, they don't really need too many general principles, because all of it is in there in customs. They're all held. There are implicit principles guiding them, but they don't need them because they are kind of absorbed through imitation. And there is a feedback mechanism of pushback of others if you digress against them. But only people who know each other very well, the small group of like 30 people or maybe 150 people of a tribe, can function like that. To scale things up to a city of 5,000 people where people don't know each other, you need explicit principles to make human interaction possible. So that, and people like the, the great traders, I call them the great traders, who connected, who took the risk of their lives to design these ships and went from culture to culture. There was tremendous danger. Even interaction with the cultures is a tremendous danger, but they figured out how to do it. That requires kind of operating at a general level of saying, what do human beings need, regardless of where they are? What can we offer them? What is it? So it's kind of thinking at a conceptual level, which was the heart of what they were doing. And that was the first instance of that. So so this is kind of my brief take on synergy and wealth. And I think this is the most important idea, if you can get the idea of synergy in this. But this is a very quick overview. So I'm going to now invite people who know a lot more about this than I do. Anybody, who would like to, who is familiar with Bucky, who would like to talk about their, you can take up to 5 minutes to talk about. Miguel, would you like to talk? So I'm going to ask, Miguel is one possibility. Let's start with Joe. Joe is the kind of designated panelist. So we'll start with Joe, followed by Miguel, and then I'm going to look through and ask anybody who wants to volunteer. You can just type a exclamation mark and go from there. Joe, go ahead.
So, that was beautifully captured, and I do think that that is a core concept. And what I'm going to try and do is, and people can opine as to what they think about that, is to build on the idea of this relationship between the mind and the brain. Because there's something that he mentions in there about how information gets polluted and it pollutes our minds. So that's a critical thing, because what is the information that's polluting our minds? It's the systems itself. Maybe if I'm a politician, the information that I have, and he refers to this later on into I think in the chapter 6, the idea of costs And costs and what wealth are really critical here in understanding what he's trying to communicate. So one of the things that I thought about was he uses the example of, well, this initiative would cost too much. And one of the initiatives he talks about is the idea of desalinization. And it's interesting when you take a step back and you look at the problem as the whole, the costs of the problem change in the sense that if I were to look at the price of water in its true value, that the true value of water is not reflected in how we use it. It's held artificially low. So then this crowds out something like specialization, or desalinization, I'm sorry. Because the idea that you're going to invest in something when you're holding the price artificially low is perverted. So this is why if you're not thinking of the system as a whole, this is an example of other optimum solutions that don't necessarily get to come to the forefront. And when I was thinking about this a little bit in general, is okay, so let's just say we have certain priorities within this. We have the human rights that everybody should have entitled a certain amount of water. But the idea of who actually, and I'm just trying to build on this example, how much water we need and how we price it, ultimately, it's a natural resource that we're using inefficiently because we do need a certain amount of water, but it doesn't need to be priced the same. So it's a way of just crowding out investment. So let's come back to the idea again of desalinization. If I think about it from a politician, the only perspective I have is to hold the price low. But if I think about it from a comprehensivist position, I think, no. How do I best use this resource and get to an optimum solution? And that's where the idea of you start to think of, all right, well, people need a certain amount of water. And then from there, practically speaking, maybe we price it at what it should be priced. Well, then the price of desalinization actually comes down, like the value of it anyway, because people would then invest in it. But I think that this is what happens is we have this way of looking at a problem very, very narrowly. And we just think we need water, people need water, let's keep the price low, and that's the end of it. Whereas a comprehensivist actually thinks of this as the whole system. And you start to think about it within the physical and the metaphysical. You start to think about it in the sense that how, what is water? Where does it come from? What's the most efficient use of it? What's cost? What is the real cost associated with it? What's the value of water? So these questions then start to come out. And I think that this is the most important part of synergetic thinking. And what he uses is a set of tools in, whether it be topologies, geodesics, general systems theory, general modeling. He uses all these tools to evaluate the entire system itself. But our minds can't be limited in that process. And that's the key. Like, we have to think about this now, if we think about it just from a specialist perspective, we're using our, and essentially what he refers to as our brains, only what we know. But if we use our imaginations, we're really using our minds. So that's my perspective as far as how that applies to the idea of wealth and in the sense of whole systems theories and synergetic thinking. I think that so that's just one small aspect of it, but I think that captured the idea of desalinization. I thought was really an excellent example.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Miguel. Miguel, go ahead.
So piggybacking a little bit on what Joe was saying, there is this approach to materiality. Bucky understands that within systems, there are multiple resources, there's different supply chains, there is different metaphysical resources as well. So he's always trying to make the largest possible impact with the least possible materials. As an example, the image behind me that you see there is a concept called tensegrity. He uses poles, and those poles are strung together with wires, and those wires restrict the degrees of freedom of movement within the structure in a way that makes it stable. But from the material use standpoint, again, the concept of synergy is that the sum of the parts, the outcome of the sum of the parts is greater than the unity. So if we were to build a system with just sticks, we need a lot more sticks, and if we use wires wouldn't be able to do it. So the combination of the two is able to create a system that outperforms the individual characteristics of the elements that are forming the system. In the metaphysical aspect, there is mention of this potential. The potential, the metaphysical potential, refers to the ability to co-create epistemologically worlds, universes, and concepts that you wouldn't be able to create by yourself. So again, it's a combination of resources, and interestingly enough, this regenerative process that he talks about wealth as opposing entropy, you can expand or increase complexity, which is counterintuitive. You can increase complexity through metaphysical evolution, and yet have a better solution, because you're looking at the whole system instead of you looking at a particular. So that's why he fights specialization, because that's narrow-mindedness. And as I said, the fact that a system becomes more complex is not necessarily a bad thing if looked at holistically, and that's evolution from the metaphysical standpoint. And I wanted to just highlight that as of recent, there's this author called Sean Aker, who is a psychologist doing specialized research on happiness. And they have been able to prove that humans have the capability of becoming happier as a collective due to the full expression of the potential within a collective rather than the individual. So again, Bucky understood the implications of the metaphysical co-creation many years ago. So
wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Miguel. Really appreciate that. Folks, now I'm going to open it up for general Q&A. So you can either comment or you can ask questions. You can go ahead. In order to do that, we've got 4 rules. Type exclamation mark in the chat or raise your hand in Zoom in order to speak. Number 2, keep on topic. Today we are talking about Bucky's ideas of synergy and wealth, and all kind of core ideas of Bucky if you want. Number 3, be brief. And number 4, speak your mind, disagree with anybody on anything, and do so courteously. We're going to start with Jairo. Jairo, what's your comment or question?
Okay, so my question is on the mind versus brain, and he said something about the mind is, or the brain deals with physical, and the mind deals with metaphysical, and then he went on to say something about entropy, and so I was wondering if in the mind, that metaphysical thing that it deals with is knowledge, as in gnosis. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So what he means that he deals with that mind deals with metaphysical. Metaphysical he uses interchangeably with intellectual or conceptual. So it is all about, so what he's pointing out is it is all about knowledge. It is all about knowledge. So the brain deals with percepts, kind of perceptual knowledge, whereas mind deals with the conceptual knowledge. It kind of abstracts kind of general patterns, general principles, general concepts, and creates knowledge. So absolutely. Next up is Dave. Dave, you need to unmute yourself.
There we go. Yeah, thanks very much, Shrikant. I remember you started with synergy, and I thought I'd talk about that a little bit because sometimes it's hard for people to comprehend that it's interactions between things going on and sometimes an unexpected result. And I want to talk about our country, you know, especially the last century. We developed it, you know, the greatest country in the world. But the thing is, it's the freedom and opportunity, and people around the world see that. And the thing of it is that this best and brightest from other countries flock here for the opportunity. So we have, gosh, people from India, you know, China, Russia, everywhere. And so that enriches our country, and we have all these inventions and advancements as a result. So that's the example I have today of synergy that I think a lot of people can see.
Absolutely, that's a great example. Let me elaborate on that. Like for example, people from India, when they come here, they actually do much better than they used to do in India, because there are no kind of restrictions, kind of cultural restrictions on them about who their friends can be, whom they can marry, whom they can, you know, how they interact. They don't have to follow in the footsteps of their caste in order to remain in a certain profession. So all these artificial ideas that were holding them back are gone. The other thing is that, you know, people from India do very well here. People from Pakistan do very well here. If you go to India or Pakistan, people in India hate people from Pakistan and vice versa over there. But over here, Indians and Pakistanis are best friends because it's basically one culture. And they like the same food, they like the same marriage, same music, they talk, they have the same language, everything is the same. So they like cricket, for example, and they get along very well. And that's the beauty of the American system, because it is focused on the individual. And all these other artificial things that are separating, that are stopping the synergy, whether within a community or across communities, is lost when people just come here. So a great point. Thank you. Thank you very much. Julie, go ahead. Julie, you need to unmute.
Oh, I didn't really mean to talk. What came to mind was orchestration and everybody playing their instrument, and to align that with people. Everybody has gifts, and when people are not trained out of their own internal GPS by society, they live that, and that is bigger than fear. As my mom was a singer and she had 5 husbands, but when she sang, I saw God. It was bigger than her fear. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder, when you have been trained out of your alignment, how you could find it again. And one question, a good manager, would that not be someone whose strength is actually that ability to work in the mind and see the relations and take the best of all the workers and integrate them into a work system?
Absolutely, absolutely. So that would be a great example of that. So a good manager, firstly, kind of understands his people very well, their strengths, their weaknesses, and he tries to put together a team in a way where the strengths, people can express their strengths fully, and their weaknesses are compensated by strengths of other people. So we looked at a book by Ray Dalio called Principles, and he does that on a kind of a systemic basis of saying, how do you put together teams where, you know, people are very open about their strengths and weaknesses, their own strengths and other people's strengths. He calls it radical transparency. And then they use that information in order to construct teams that work really, you know, effectively together. So that's a very good point. All right, any more questions or comments? You can go ahead. All right, anybody else?
Can I actually just comment on the last?
Go ahead.
On what was just said last. It's
sure.
It's also the thing that a great manager can do, or anybody, is inspire the mind, and inspire this creativity, and opened our minds. And once you become more open, and you have more of an open system, and you have this way of thinking about the whole, problem solving starts to, you're able to solve problems. And one of the important parts that comes out of systems thinking, and this is true with Ackroff as well, if you only think of it within the specialist terms, and you only think of it within a very narrow sense, the whole gets worse if you only think of problems in a very narrow way. So the idea that you're inspiring people's minds as a manager is actually critical, so that people can start to actually, you know, essentially start to think of, you know, the problems as the whole, and then they see their role within that system, and that's just as critical as well, because then you're able to play that role. And I think that that's another important part of systems thinking, is that you're opening people's minds, not only to it's just basically opening people's minds.
Wonderful, great point, Joe. So now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to summarize what I have learned from Bucky so far, and what I've taken away so far. Again, I want to emphasize that this is kind of just my beginning of this. I'm reading the next book. See, it's great to have CJ, because CJ not only knows Bucky very well, but he actually sees Bucky in the comprehensivist context of saying there is a lot more. So what does Bucky have to offer in various contexts? So, and he knows me well enough, and he watches all the, even if he can't attend this, he actually watches all the videos and gives me detailed comments and suggestions based on that. So the next thing I'm reading is Design Strategy. It's also a very short work by Bucky, and I'm looking forward to that. So I'm going to go deep into this further. But what I always like to do is to kind of summarize, kind of try to, now this is what I'm saying now, from now on, is just purely mine, okay? This is me trying to put together things. So this is not Bucky. I'm not speaking about his ideas. I'm speaking about my ideas based on what I've learned from him, and how his ideas have helped me in the last 3 weeks. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use, I'm a very visual person, so I'm going to use some diagrams. So let me just share my iPad here. All right, so I'm using the iPad. The iPad connection is a little slow, and it will, yeah, that's better. Okay, I'm going to just minimize these windows here. All right, so first, I'm trying to, this is my take on Bucky's ideas. On the left-hand side is principles of action. This is the general principles that this is metaphysical. On the right-hand side is the physical. Okay, so there is patterns of action that you can see in the world, in yourself, in the physical world, and it's the principles of operation. I want to tell you that my focus is slightly different than Bucky's. My focus is on human beings. So I'm looking at so the largest concept I have that I use is civilization. I'm kind of thinking of the 8 billion people out there and the kind of human civilization. And then I'm looking at individual people. So that's kind of my take on it. So it's not, and I see kind of the physical as the context in which the civilization is taking place, okay? So there are patterns of action and there is, so this is the distinction between physical and metaphysical of Bucky. So again, remember, you know, in the second meetup, we talked about systems and he talked about the bifurcation. You know, you kind of divide everything into two and you go and you're trying to capture. So this is the first bit. The first bit is that, is it physical or is it metaphysical? Okay, now I want to put in the next bits here. And this is my, I think this is a model that I've been using for some time. So above the line over here, okay, above the line is what, you know, we started with Bucky. I asked myself a question. I think the idea of synergy is extremely powerful. And then, okay, wait a minute. Can everybody see my screen? Just, okay. Joe, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, very good. So Dave, you need to figure out something with your, what you're using in order to figure out the screen.
Thank you.
Are you able to see it? All right, okay. So let me continue. So everything above the line is just what we talked about, Bucky, okay? Now I'm extending it, okay? And in what direction am I extending it? I'm extending it into the direction of the psyche, okay? Actually, I came up with this model from the other direction. I've studied I've studied people like Daniel Kahneman and Carl Jung or Carl Rogers. And they start with the psyche. And what I found lacking in their work, that, or not really lacking, they had it, but they had it not put it explicitly, is the physical context in which this, you know, we operate. And what, okay, let me come at it as a question first. I looked at the concept of synergy of Bucky and I said, wow, this is an amazing concept. And I also agree with him is that if you actually have the right concept, it's going to have tremendous impact in the world. The world will change. And I looked and said, the world has not changed as much as I would have expected it to change. So why? What's missing? Is there something missing? And I do think that there is something that is missing. Not missing, but incomplete, I would say. If something is added to this concept of synergy, it would be much more powerful. And there is already, again, I'm used the kind of comprehensivist approach. And that's actually what CJ is also trying to do. He's trying to look at all the comprehensivist traditions and seeing what you can learn from them. So this is my own way of doing this, okay? What I found was that Bucky's approach starts outside in, and he's very, very good at doing that. So he's looking at the principles of operation of the physical energy, and he's abstracting things from it, and he's going somewhat in the psyche. But I think the psyche is very deep, and it's all kinds of issues involved in that, and which has also kind of synergetic issues within the psyche. And if you grasp the synergy within the psyche and outside, you are able to understand more. I actually came up with this model from the direction of psyche. So I started by looking at Daniel Kahneman's ideas of system 1 and system 2. So for example, this is system 1, the yellow one, and this one is system 2. These are psyches. These are basically the system 1 is our automatic faculty. It is what Bucky is calling the brain. It is our ability, we have a very large brain, able to see many patterns. We are able to bring them together and we are able to act based on that. So there is action, just this action happening without anything on this side, which is our evolutionary heritage. So just the right-hand side. So you have tremendously large brains, and we are able to operate in a group, a small group, under the Dunbar number of maybe 30 closely knit group and maybe 150 loosely knit group. And we can conduct large scale actions like hunting, for example, to carry it out. And there, basically just this part is operative. These two parts are operative, okay? Again, Daniel Kahneman focuses more on the yellow part, not as much on the kind of external actions that are driven by it. So in that sense, he's coming at this direction, in the direction exactly opposite that of Bucky. But both those elements are needed, okay? On the left-hand bottom corner, I call relentless deliberation. Deliberation, that is what Daniel Kahneman calls system 2. This is our reasoning capacity. This is our thinking capacity. This is our ability to say, have I made a mistake? Trying to do a check against objective reality, new evidence, and correcting things. That's what the deliberation is all about. Daniel Kahneman calls it system 2. Carl Jung has his own terminology. He calls the left bottom corner unconscious, and the right, the right corner, the intuition, kind of unconscious, and on the other side is the conscious. Okay, now, so this is a very quick, way in which I think. So let me kind of elaborate on this. Let me see what are the implications of this. I find that you really need to be aware of all of these things. Okay, if you have principles of operation that you're using, there are ways of kind of using principles of operation created by somebody else. If you do not have the relentless deliberation supporting it, it's not going to work for too long. Even if you start with a good principle, you're not going to be able to do, because that relentless ability of looking at yourself and saying, have I made a mistake? And taking all the heat inside and outside to make it happen. So there is a loop that goes like this, a synergetic loop that goes like that. You have to be able to have a loop that goes like this between your system 1 and system 2. You have to have things where, on one hand, you should be open and creative, not be continuously criticized by your system 2, so that you can fully express yourself, and then be able to step into system 2 and critique whatever you have produced, so that you can make sure that it is consistent with reality, with everything that you know. And then be again open to, so there is a loop, and I've talked about it in this analytical and creative shuttling in the process of writing. So there is a loop over there. There is a loop over here of kind of pattern of actions, supporting, being supported by your intuition. Intuition develops over a period of time. It gets used to certain pattern of actions. There is, of course, a loop going on between here. You discover a principle, and then you have to build it in to your actions. You have to learn from the actions, and so there is, and there are loops going on all across each way here. Okay, so the synergy of your psyche and your outside existence is as complicated an issue as the synergy between principles and action. And fullest kind of explication of all the synergetic principles inside the psyche and between the psyche and the interaction with the physical energy and the explicit principles that we live by, I think produces more synergy as a result of that. Okay, so I'm going to rub this out and I'm going to go to the next one. So, so this was a small criticism of Buckminster Fuller. I think if this, if we integrate Carl Jung and Daniel Kahneman into Buckminster Fuller's work, I think we can do a lot more. And that's one of the things that, I'm working on my own. All right. Now I want to bring back Buckminster Fuller to show his genius again. Okay. And so let's go over here. Okay. So now let's go back to his concept of systems. We're always thinking of inside the system and outside the system. By the way, using his terminology, we started out here with just 1 bit. Okay. Now we have added 2 bits over here. This is 2 bits. So we are added psyche versus the external. And now we are adding the system bit kind of inside and outside the system. Okay. So that's what we are doing. So now what is this? This is the way I think about kind of inside the system and outside the system. Okay. The best way to illustrate that is to kind of personalize it. So for example, let's say you, okay? So let's say you are on the right-hand side here. So let me see what happened here. Yeah. Okay, so this is I. So think of yourself here. Okay, you have your principles by which you're operating. You have a certain principles, you have certain patterns of action. You have certain deliberation ability. Typically how you do deliberation. You have intuition at some level. You have all of these things. Okay. Now, that is inside. Now let's look at outside. Okay. Currently, let's look at outside as this meetup. Okay. And let's look at what's going on. Okay. So this is inside, right? This is inside. And this is outside. Okay. So your system and you're actually interacting here in a meetup. The meetup has certain principles of operation. Okay. And they integrate with your principles of operation. So for example, the principle of operation here is that we are doing joint exploration of the world, ourselves, and ideas. That's the principle. That's what these meetups are about. Now, for example, if your principle, for example, if you did not care about this, it would not be worth your while to even be here. Okay. So there is some principle that you have that matches over here, the inside with the outside to make it work. Okay. Let's look at the principles of operation of these meetup more detail. We have 4 rules, right? First one, you type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. Why is that? That is because the patterns of all the individual eyes, or all the patterns of actions of all individual people. Now imagine you can put this outside at the core, and you put all the 20 people currently on the side. So having their all kind of these squares, okay? And all of this is going on. And you can see this central square, right? This square, put it in the center, right? And imagine that there are 20 such squares on this side, okay? Individual squares, all right? So when you do that, okay, it allows, what is the pattern of action here? It is speech. That's the mode through which we are actually interacting with each other. That pattern of action is being governed by certain principles of operation. Those 4 principles, that in order to speak, you type an exclamation mark or you raise your hand in Zoom. So that makes sure that it doesn't interrupt anybody else's pattern of action, doesn't disrupt it. Okay. Second one is keep on topic. We are all here committed to focus on this topic. Anything else, any pattern of action apart from that is going to disrupt what we have come to do. So that's why that principle of action is shaping that. Number 3, be brief. That ensures there is a limited time for this meetup. We want to hear from everybody. We want everybody to be able to learn from everybody. By being brief is the only way to do that. Okay, so that's the 3rd. And number 4, speak your mind, disagree with anybody on anything, and do so courteously. Okay, so those are the principles that allow for patterns of action to go through. So far we have talked about how these two things go together. So your own pattern of action is, and the thing is that if you think that, for example, I should be able to speak whenever I want, and that, I just feel like speaking, then it's going to clash with the principle of this meetup. And I'm going to actually mute you, okay? Because that's what is needed for that. And typically people who are here get extremely, it's very rare for somebody but some people do show up and they get very frustrated and they just leave because there is no commonality of principle between what they have or somebody comes to say just something about something. They don't really care. They just want to speak about something. If that is the case, again, it conflicts with the central principle of the meetup. So that's at the pattern of level, at this level. Now let's look at what happens, below the line in the yellow and in the blue. Okay. So the principle of speaking your mind, okay, and feeling free to disagree with anybody. Okay. So firstly, there is a culture. Now, all of this is now built into, this is a commonality between us, people who are here, people who are regular attendees here. They have a certain thing that is going on here in their system 1, certain kind of values which are kind of built in to them. So they have a kind of a respect for other people. They have a respect for the independence of thought. Okay. And they will be tolerant. They will actually hear the other person for a period of time without getting upset at them. Okay. So which allows anybody who is showing up to talk, to kind of express whatever observations that they have without being kind of pushed back on it. So there is a commonality over there. And that's part of the culture that I have tried to cultivate here as well. So this is actually kind of the way in which our system 1s work. And there is a commonality between this. Okay, so this is at the system 1 level. Okay, so there is a kind of the ethos of kind of respect for individuals. Okay, the second part is that the issue of relentless deliberation. Okay, you're saying speak your mind, disagree with anybody that you want. Okay, and do so courteously. Do so courteously is about this part. That's, courtesy means that anybody should be free to speak their mind. If you push back against that, people will be inhibited on speaking. So that's about, but speaking your mind is all about deliberation. Again, people who come here value deliberation. If somebody is pointing out something that is real, but they have not seen it, actually, for me, I'll speak for myself. If somebody points out that I'm wrong about something, I'm grateful to them because I've learned something, because I actually want to be right. I don't want to pretend to be right. I want to be right. So that is the approach towards deliberation. So there is deliberation, and there's a lot of expression of all kinds of views that takes place that allow for deliberation over here. So this is an example of you and this meetup, okay? But you can skip that and you can look at anything. So this could be you, and you can look at, for example, Dave was talking about America. Okay, what are the principles of operation of America? What are the patterns of actions? What are your actions? Let's say an immigrant, let's say put here an immigrant coming to America. What happens? Like, for example, for Indian, it is completely freeing. You can express yourself far more here. You can do this a lot more. The actions are far less restricted. The operations are principles of operation are very different. So you can look at that. You can look at and you can look at the, civilization as a whole. Okay. If you want, you can look at the first thing can be different. So you can look at your company, okay, over here. How does it function with respect to economy? Okay. Or you can look at your family and your culture, or you can look at yourself and your family, or you can look at and you can talk about a friend. What is it? And in each case, you can say, what is the commonality of principles of operation that we agree on? How do our patterns of action mesh with each other? Are we actually open to this relentless deliberation, both sides? And can we actually conduct kind of a honest exchange when we disagree? How do our systems kind of interact with one another? Is there a level of kind of comfort and trust that has been built between that? So you can take this, the inside outside in any which way you want. So that's an example of how. So this is now 3 bits. So the first one is metaphysical versus physical. The second one is like psyche and the civilization as such, if you want. I don't think those words are really good, but I'll figure them out. And then second is kind of inside and outside. So this is my 8-bit version of looking at Bucky. So I'm open to comments and you know what? Like, does anybody have any questions? We'll take only questions, and then what we'll do is we'll do quick breakout rooms for 20 minutes, and then we can share our takeaways. All right, first one up is Jairo. Jairo, go ahead. What's your question?
Yes. Let's see. Oh no. I forgot his name. Your co-presenter.
CJ.
I heard
co-presenter today.
Today, yeah.
Oh no, we're taking questions only about this particular thing right now. Only this diagram.
Okay. Well, it might be related because he meant because it is kind of related because you were talking about immigrants in America.
Yes, please.
And you were saying that there's, and in other moments, you're saying, or people are saying, or you expressed that in India there's a lot more restrictions, like the caste system might be restrictive, but then your co-presenter had mentioned a study that sort of proved that happiness was more available to people that are maybe thinking of others or being collective somehow. So wouldn't that mean that people in India, because they're more collective due to their restrictions, that they would be more happier than coming to the United States?
Okay, maybe excellent question. So let me go ahead.
People to be unhappy when they come here.
Excellent. Let me answer that. That's I'm an immigrant. I've seen many immigrants, and I can see. So there are 2 kinds of social interaction, I think. There is kind of the interaction which is kind of under the Dunbar number, which is like the family and friends whom you know very well. And actually in the old world, in most of the older cultures, that connection between friends and family is far deeper. And that's a very valuable thing, okay? But it comes as a package deal in the older cultures or tribes with saying that anybody outside is bad. Okay, so it, or implicitly, explicitly, implicitly, to some extent. Okay, what America offers is that, so in a sense, it's very hard for immigrants. Okay, immigration, I mean, it's very hard for immigrants. You leave everything behind. America was formed by immigrants. They had to leave everything behind, come here, take tremendous danger. Everything that you know is behind, all your assets, all your connections, everything is behind, and you have to start over. Of course, it is difficult. Okay. The other part is that there is a level of commonality between human beings, of saying that, you know, human beings themselves are good, have potential of good, regardless of where they come from, you know, what tribe they belong to, and being able to connect to human beings at that level. And that is also very profound. That is also very profound. Okay, so that's two different things, but I don't want to go too much into this because the questions, I want to focus only on this one right now. But it was a fantastic question. I mean, I could go on and on about kind of the immigrants and their, you know, what is the upside, what is the downside. There is the same things happen far more complicated. It becomes far more complicated when immigrants have families where they try to transmit the same culture to their children while the culture around them is very different, which causes all kinds of issues. So there's all kinds of things over there. Don't want to go into too much detail. So let's do one thing. Let's do breakout rooms for a few minutes, for about 20 minutes, and then we'll come back and share our takeaways.